So, you know that feeling, right? That pit in your stomach when you're standing there looking something new, maybe something big, and the world, or maybe just, that voice in your head starts whispering about failure.
Oh, absolutely. We live in a culture that's just, well, obsessed with success, climbing ladders, hitting targets, always showing that perfect side.
Totally. And in that kind of world, failure feels like the worst thing.
Yeah.
The absolute opposite of what we're supposed to be aiming for.
It does, and that societal pressure, it's huge. It kind of makes us see failure not just as, a setback, but like proof you weren't good enough.
Right.
And when you feel like there aren't many second chances, well, that creates a very real fear. Fear of messing up, fear of not measuring up, just fear of falling behind for good.
And that fear, it can stop you in your tracks.
Yeah.
Just totally paralyzing.
Yeah.
But what if that whole picture isn't quite right? What if failure isn't just not the opposite of success? What if it's actually like a key part of getting there for achievement and personal growth?
That's the interesting question, isn't it? And that's really the idea we want to unpack today.
Yeah, we're diving into this perspective, and we're using insights from an article called Embracing Failure Leads to Success and Personal Growth by Victor Loom.
Right. Our goal here in this deep dive is really to explore these core ideas with you, the listener.
We want to pull out the key reasons why leaning into failure instead of, running away screaming might actually be the path to developing yourself. Give you the main takeaways without you having to sift through it all.
Exactly. So let's get into it.
Okay, so this material jumps right back to that feeling we started with this, like societal obsession with succeeding.
Yeah, and how we often fail to see failure as a teacher in itself.
He talks about how a culture without many second chances actually breeds fear. Not just, oh no, I messed up, but a deeper anxiety about making any move that isn't a guaranteed win.
And it's striking how the source describes the path to success these days. It feels narrower, like there's this rigid formula starting really young.
Oh, yeah. All right grades, then the right school, got to land the right job, settle down by X age.
Exactly. And the source points out if you step off that specific track, you risk getting labeled pretty quickly.
It feels like those old safety nets. Maybe having time to explore different interests, or employers looking at potential over just a fancy degree. Even relationships maybe being less tied to strict timelines. They're just thinner now.
Yeah, they really seem to be. And the implication is pretty heavy in this kind of climate. One mistake, one perceived wrong turn can feel like it's game over, like the end of the road.
Definitely. It makes you pause and think, right? Does that description ring true for you? That feeling of less room for error?
It's a tough reality for a lot of people, I think.
But then the material does something interesting. It pivots. It challenges that pressure directly.
It lays out this really simple, undeniable fact. Every single person who has achieved something significant, they've failed.
Not just once.
Oh, no. Often repeatedly. That's the kicker.
Okay, so here's the core of it then. The difference, according to this source, isn't that successful people are perfect or that they never mess up.
Right.
It's their courage. Their willingness to just keep going after they fall down.
Which ties right back to that fear we were talking about. The source suggests that when we feel stuck, unable to decide, it's usually not because we can't, but because we're afraid of getting it wrong.
And here's a really counterintuitive bit. Sometimes the people most afraid of failing are the ones who, haven't really failed big time yet.
Why? Because they haven't built up that resilience, that inner knowledge that, okay, I can survive this. I can get through a setback.
Huh. Interesting.
So if you take that perspective on board, that failure isn't some weird exception or a fatal flaw, but actually a normal part of successful journeys, how does that start to shift things for you? How you look at your own hurdles or hesitations?
That shift in perspective is, it's everything, really.
Yeah.
And it leads us right into how we internalize all this stuff.
Yeah.
Our mindset.
Exactly. The source brings up psychologist Carol Dweck's work here, specifically the idea of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset.
Right. So growth mindset. You believe your abilities can be developed. You actually kind of like challenges. You stick with things when they're hard.
And crucially, you see failure not as proof you're no good, but as feedback, information, part of learning.
Yeah. Whereas the fixed mindset, the source paints it as this constant need to prove yourself, which means you tend to avoid anything where you might risk failing.
And that can make your world feel pretty small, pretty fast.
But here's the really hopeful part from the source. Mindset isn't set in stone.
Thank goodness. It can change.
And that change, the material suggests, often starts with how we react to failure, both in ourselves and in others. It needs encouragement, not shame.
Absolutely. If someone tries something and it doesn't work out, the response needs to be supportive. Focus on what was learned, not who's to blame. Growth needs that kind of nurturing environment. It doesn't just happen in a vacuum.
It really makes you reflect, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When you hit a snag, which mindset tends to kick in?
Yeah.
And what might happen if you actively tried to cultivate more of that growth perspective in your own life? How might that change how you face challenges?
It's a powerful question.
Now look, if all this talk about facing failure or trying to rewire your brain feels a bit daunting,
Yeah, it can.
the source actually offers some reassurance here.
It does. It reminds us that, hey, struggling with decisions, feeling self-doubt, that's just being human.
You're not alone in feeling that way. Doesn't mean you're broken or flawed.
Exactly. And the goal, the source clarifies, isn't to become completely fearless. That's probably not realistic anyway.
The goal is to fear less. Just enough courage to take the next step, even if you're unsure, and, really importantly, to try again after a setback.
And it connects this idea of pushing through uncertainty directly to innovation, to creativity.
Right. New ideas, breakthroughs, reinventing yourself.
Yeah.
And they don't usually happen when you're playing it safe in your comfort zone.
No, they often come from disruption, from stepping outside, even just a little bit.
He even mentions a bit of neuroscience, how things like movement, rest, just following your curiosity can literally open up new thinking pathways. You know, the classic Einstein example.
Riding his bicycle.
Yeah. Getting out, moving his body, changing the scenery, and boom, inspiration strikes.
It's a great illustration. So the question this prompts for you, the listener, is, if you're feeling a bit stuck, where could you find a small spark? Take one tiny step outside your usual routine.
Yeah, where's your metaphorical bicycle ride?
Exactly. Ultimately, though, the source brings it all back to something really fundamental about how we define ourselves.
It offers this powerful shift. Your worth isn't really about your list of accomplishments. It's about your willingness to try, to learn, to grow.
That changes everything. And it redefines resilience, too, doesn't it? Resilience isn't about never, ever falling down.
Nope. It's about how you get back up, how you face that next unknown step with, a brave heart and a sense of purpose, knowing you're moving forward.
And the final call to action from this material is pretty direct, but also empowering. It basically says, if you're stuck at a crossroads, scared to choose, scared you'll fail if you do choose.
Just take the leap anyway.
Take the leap. Because the people who really make a difference, who change things, they're the ones who had a perfectly smooth ride.
No, they're the ones who fell down, got back up, and just kept going.
As the source puts it so well, failure isn't the opposite of success. It's the foundation. It's the ground success is built on.
Wow. So, thinking about it that way, failure as the foundation, not the roadblock. How does that shift your view of what's actually possible for you?
It's a big shift.
Okay, so bringing this deep dive toward a close, the main message really feels clear, doesn't it?
Yeah, failure isn't this big, scary monster we should avoid at all costs. It's actually necessary. It's valuable. It's how we learn, how we grow.
And ultimately, how we succeed.
Exactly. We've talked about how that fear of failure can grip us, especially in today's society.
Right. And how successful people actually use failure. They rise from it. We talked about the huge difference a growth mindset makes.
The need for support, taking those small, brave steps outside the comfort zone.
And redefining what resilience and even self-worth really mean, focusing on the willingness to grow.
So here's a final thought to leave you with, building on this material. If failure truly is the foundation for success, what opportunities to build a stronger foundation might you be missing out on just by staying inside that zone where you feel safe, where you think you can avoid any chance of failing?
That's definitely something to chew on.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into this material.